She stood at the altar, her hand trembling in his, and he did not once look at her face. The chapel was filled with candlelight and the murmur of noble guests, but to Alara Montfort the air felt thin and cold, as though she were standing alone on the edge of a frozen lake. The Duke of Thornwood, Lord Aldrich Vane, was a tall, imposing figure beside her, his grip on her fingers impersonal, like a man holding a quill rather than a bride. His gaze remained fixed on the stained-glass window above the priest, his jaw set, his entire presence radiating a quiet, impenetrable distance. When the priest asked for the ring, Aldrich slid it onto her finger without meeting her eyes. The gold was cold, and it felt like a shackle. Alara's throat tightened, but she swallowed the ache. She had been taught to endure. Her father, a baron drowning in debt, had arranged this union as a business transaction. The Duke needed an heir, a respectable wife to manage his vast estate, and her family needed his money. Love had never been part of the bargain. Still, a foolish, girlish part of her had hoped for a flicker of warmth, a whispered word of comfort. She received only silence. As they walked back down the aisle, his arm stiff beneath her hand, Alara glanced over her shoulder at the crowded pews. Somewhere beyond these cold stone walls, a young man with kind hazel eyes had once promised to return for her. Sir Cedric Ashford. He had kissed her hand in the orchard and sworn that no amount of distance or time would keep them apart. She had clung to that promise like a lifeline, even as she was forced to say her vows to another. She had written to Cedric the night before the wedding, a desperate, tear-stained letter, assuring him she would find a way. She believed with all her broken heart that he would come for her. But the carriage had carried her away from her father's crumbling estate toward Thornwood Hall, and Cedric had not appeared. Now, as the heavy chapel doors swung open and the gray afternoon light spilled over her, Alara Montfort became the Duchess of Thornwood, a title that felt as hollow as the echo of her footsteps on the stone floor. Thornwood Hall was a magnificent prison. It sprawled across the Devonshire countryside, a grand manor of silver stone and towering windows, surrounded by ancient oaks that whispered secrets in the wind. The servants were efficient, the gardens immaculate, the drawing rooms filled with exquisite art. And yet, from the moment Alara crossed the threshold, she felt invisible. The Duke escorted her to her chambers, a beautiful suite of pale blue and cream, then excused himself with a curt nod. "You will find everything you require, Your Grace. Should you need anything, Mrs. Harlow, the housekeeper, will attend you." He was gone before she could reply. Alara stood in the middle of the room, still wearing her ivory wedding gown, and felt the first tear slip down her cheek. She quickly wiped it away. She would not break. Not yet. Instead, she crossed to the writing desk by the window, pulled out a sheet of paper, and began to write. "My dearest Cedric, I am at Thornwood. It is as cold as I feared, but I will not give up hope. I promised you my heart, and it remains yours. Write to me. Tell me you still love me. Tell me you will come. I will wait for you no matter how long it takes." She sealed the letter with trembling fingers and entrusted it to a young footman the next morning, asking him to post it to the address Cedric had given her months ago. She watched the writer disappear down the long gravel drive, and for a brief, shimmering moment, hope flickered inside her chest. That hope would become her sweetest torture. The first month at Thornwood was a lesson in loneliness. The Duke rose early, spent his days locked in his study or riding across the estate, and dined in near silence. When he did speak to her, his words were polite, formal, empty. He asked if her rooms were comfortable. He inquired if she needed new gowns. He never asked how she felt. He never looked at her long enough to see the sorrow pooling in her eyes. Alara tried. She really did. She dressed carefully for dinner, choosing soft colors she thought might please him. She attempted conversation about the estate, about books, about the stables. His replies were always brief, his attention somewhere else. One evening, she gathered her courage and placed her hand lightly on his sleeve as they left the dining room. "Aldrich," she whispered, using his given name for the first time. He stiffened. His arm withdrew as if her touch had burned him. "I have a great deal of work tonight, Your Grace. Please do not wait up." She stood alone in the corridor, the candle flames shivering in their sconces, and felt the hope inside her begin to wither. Every week, she wrote another letter to Cedric. She poured her loneliness onto the pages, describing the cold grandeur of the hall, the ache of sleeping in a bed that was never shared, the way her husband's eyes passed over her like she was a piece of furniture. She sealed each letter with wax and pressed her lips to the paper before handing it to the footman. No reply ever came. Weeks stretched into months. Autumn bled into a bitter winter. Alara stopped waiting by the window. The footman no longer met her hopeful gaze. He simply took her letters and looked away. She began to understand that she had been abandoned twice, first by the man she was forced to marry, and now by the man she had loved. The humiliation that broke something inside her did not happen in private. It happened in a crowded ballroom. The Duke had been summoned to a grand celebration at the neighboring estate of Lord and Lady Ashworth. Alara had not wanted to go. She felt fragile, worn thin by sleepless nights and unanswered prayers. But Aldrich had insisted, quietly, coldly, that a duchess must be seen. So she dressed in a gown of deep emerald silk, pinned her dark hair into an elegant arrangement, and painted a serene smile on her face. The Ashworth ballroom glittered with chandeliers and laughter. Alara stood near the edge of the dance floor, a glass of champagne untouched in her hand, while Aldrich circulated among the other nobles. He had not danced with her. He had not even introduced her to half the people who stared at her with thinly veiled curiosity. Then she heard the whispers. "They say he only married her for her father's land. She's practically invisible at Thornwood. Poor thing, she hasn't produced an heir either. Perhaps the Duke finds her unappealing. I heard her heart belonged to another. A knight with no fortune, how tragic." The voices belonged to Lady Marguerite Vane, a distant cousin of Aldrich, with serpentine eyes and a smile that never reached them. She was surrounded by a small flock of gossip-hungry matrons, all of them casting glances in Alara's direction. Lady Marguerite had wanted the Duke for herself, or so the rumors said. And her jealousy curdled into poison every time she looked at the new Duchess. Alara's cheeks burned. She set down her glass and walked out onto the terrace, the cold night air stinging her skin. Tears blurred the stars. She wrapped her arms around herself and tried to remember how to breathe. The sound of footsteps made her turn. Aldrich appeared in the doorway, his silhouette sharp against the golden light. For one fragile second, she thought he had come to comfort her. "Your absence is being noticed," he said, his voice flat. "Return to the ballroom." "I cannot," she whispered. "They are saying terrible things." His expression did not change. "They will say worse if you hide. You are the Duchess of Thornwood, act like it." He turned and walked back inside, leaving her alone in the cold. Alara did not return. She found a servant's entrance, summoned her carriage, and rode home in the dark, her tears falling silently onto her folded hands. That night, she did not write to Cedric. She sat at the writing desk until dawn, the blank paper mocking her, and finally she opened the drawer and placed her pen inside. She would never write another letter. It was in the following weeks that Alara Montfort began to change. She stopped seeking Aldrich's attention. She stopped waiting for him at dinner, stopped choosing gowns she thought he might admire, stopped pausing outside his study hopping to hear his voice. Instead, she turned her focus outward, to the estate she had been so afraid of when she first arrived. She began visiting the tenant farms, accompanied only by a maid and a quiet determination. She learned names, asked about harvests, listened to worries about sick livestock and leaking roofs. She took detailed notes and brought them to the steward, Mr. Lennox, a kind-eyed man in his 50s who had served Thornwood for decades. He was initially surprised by her interest, but soon he was teaching her the account books, explaining crop rotations, showing her how the ledgers balanced. Alara discovered she had a sharp mind. She reorganized household expenses, found savings that allowed for repairs to several cottages, and even arranged for a new schoolroom for the village children. The servants began to smile when she passed. The tenants called her Our Lady with genuine affection. She wore simpler gowns now, sturdy fabrics that could withstand mud and wind. Her hands, once soft and idle, grew capable, and her heart, though still bruised, stopped bleeding. Aldrich noticed the change slowly, like a man waking from a long sleep. He had been away for nearly 3 weeks, settling a border dispute on the northern edge of his property. When he returned, riding up the long drive at dusk, he expected the usual quiet greeting, the housekeeper perhaps, or a nervous footman. Instead, he found the front drive bustling with activity. A cart loaded with timber stood near the stables, and several village men were unloading it under the direction of a young woman in a dark blue cloak. It took him a moment to realize the woman was his wife. Ilara was laughing, actually laughing. She held a ledger in one hand and gestured with the other while Mr. Lennox nodded beside her. Her hair had slipped loose from its pins, and a smudge of dirt marked her cheek. She looked entirely unlike the pale, trembling bride he had left behind. Aldrich dismounted slowly. A strange sensation coiled in his chest, something sharp and unfamiliar. He watched as one of the village men, a young carpenter named Thomas, stepped forward and said something that made Ilara laugh again. The sound floated across the twilight, warm and unguarded. Aldrich had never heard her laugh like that. Not once. Not for him. The sharp thing twisted deeper. He recognized it now. Jealousy. He crossed the drive with measured steps. "Your Grace," he said, his voice cooler than he intended. Ilara turned. Her laughter faded, replaced by a polite, neutral expression. "Your Grace, welcome home. I did not expect you until tomorrow." Clearly. Her smile did not waver, but it became something distant, something practiced. "We are making improvements to the east cottages. The roofs were leaking badly. Mr. Lennox and I oversaw the ordering of supplies." "I see." Aldrich's gaze flicked to the steward, then to the carpenter who still stood nearby, admiration evident in his eyes. "You have been busy." "Yes," she closed the ledger. "The tenants needed help. I found I had time to give it." She did not add, "since I no longer waste it waiting for you." She did not need to. The words hung unspoken in the chilly air. Aldrich felt a prickle of guilt, but he crushed it down. "We will discuss this inside." "Of course." She inclined her head, then turned back to Mr. Lennox. "Please see that the timber is stored properly. I will review the remaining accounts in the morning." "Yes, Your Grace." The steward bowed, and Ilara walked past Aldrich toward the house without another glance. He stood there for a long moment, the evening wind cutting through his riding coat. Something had shifted. The quiet, yearning woman who once followed his footsteps with desperate eyes was gone. In her place stood a stranger, composed, self-possessed, and utterly indifferent to him. The realization should have brought him relief. He had wanted distance. He had cultivated it carefully. Instead, it felt like a door slamming shut. A fortnight later, Lady Marguerite arrived for an uninvited visit. She swept into the drawing room in a flurry of silk and false sweetness, her eyes darting around as if cataloging everything she could later twist into gossip. Ilara received her with flawless grace, offering tea and polite conversation about the weather, the roads, the latest fashions from London. Aldrich stood near the fireplace, observing the exchange with a quiet tension he could not name. Lady Marguerite's smile sharpened when she noticed Ilara's simpler gown. "How practical you look, cousin. Running an estate is such demanding work. I suppose when one is not blessed with children, one must find other occupations." The insult landed with surgical precision. Ilara's teacup paused halfway to her lips. A faint, painful color rose to her cheeks, but she set the cup down gently. "Indeed, idle hands are a luxury I have never been able to afford." "How humble of you." Marguerite's gaze slid to Aldrich. "But surely, cousin, you must be eager for an heir. Thornwood has always valued legacy. Aldrich's jaw tightened. The matter is not your concern. Forgive me, she laughed, a tinkling, false sound. I only meant that everyone wonders why such a young, healthy couple has not yet been blessed. The rumors are quite wild. Alara rose from her chair. The movement was calm, but there was steel beneath it. Rumors, Lady Marguerite, are the refuge of small minds. I trust you will enjoy the rest of your tea. I have duties to attend. She walked out of the room, her back straight, her head high. The door clicked shut behind her, and a profound silence filled the drawing room. Aldrich stared at the empty doorway. Something hot and painful unfurled in his chest, protectiveness, perhaps, or a slow-burning fury at the way his own blood had spoken to his wife. He turned to Marguerite, his voice low and dangerous. You will pack your things and leave within the hour. Do not return to Thornwood without an express invitation. Marguerite's smirk faltered. Aldrich, I only meant. You meant a wound, now leave. His tone left no room for argument. For the first time, he did not follow logic or obligation. He followed an instinct he had suppressed for years, and that instinct screamed one undeniable truth. He cared far more than he had ever allowed himself to admit. Later that evening, unable to settle, Aldrich found himself walking past Alara's private sitting room. The door was ajar. He paused, hearing the soft rustle of paper. Peering through the gap, he saw her seated at her writing desk, her head bowed. The candlelight flickered over her face, tracing the tracks of silent tears. She was not writing. She was holding a small, worn letter, one he recognized with a jolt of sickening guilt. It was the last letter she had written to Cedric Ashford, the one she had never sent because she had given up hope. But how had she found it? The truth crashed over him. She had discovered the drawer. His chest constricted. He had kept every single one of her letters, those desperate, loving missives she had entrusted to the footman all those months ago. He had instructed his most loyal servant to intercept them before they ever left the estate. He had read them in the silence of his study, each word a dagger, each sentence a testament to the love she gave to another man. Why had he kept them? He had told himself it was to understand his enemy, to know when Cedric might become a threat. But the real reason was far more shameful. He had been starving for a glimpse of her heart, even if that heart did not belong to him. And now she knew. Aldrich stepped into the room. The floorboard creaked. Alara looked up. Her eyes were red-rimmed but dry, and a terrible, quiet fury burned in their depths. She stood, clutching the letter. You took them, she whispered. You stole my letters. You let me wait and hope and break month after month, knowing there would never be an answer. Alara, his voice cracked on her name. He had never called her that before. Do not. She held up a hand, her fingers trembling. Tell me why. Tell me what right you had to destroy the only piece of happiness I possessed. Aldrich felt the floor drop away beneath him. He had rehearsed this moment 100 times, but now all his careful justifications crumbled. Cedric Ashford was not what you believed, he said, his voice hoarse. He was a fortune hunter. He had already secured the attention of a wealthy widow when he promised himself to you. I had him investigated. He wanted your father's land, not your heart. When I learned of your attachment, I paid him to stay away. He took the money and never looked back. Alara's face went white. The letter fluttered to the floor. You paid him. I did what was necessary to protect you from a life of ruin. Aldrich forced himself to meet her gaze. I could not let you throw yourself away on a man who would abandon you the moment your dowry was spent. Protect me, she repeated, her voice hollow. You think this was protection. You let me believe I was forgotten. You let me love a ghost while I lived in your cold, silent house, invisible and unwanted. She pressed a hand to her stomach as if she had been struck. You never gave me a single moment of tenderness, Aldrich, not one. And now you tell me you stole my hope because you knew better. Aldrich reached for her. She flinched back, her eyes blazing. Do not touch me. The words were quiet, but they shattered something inside him. He let his hand fall. Alara, please, let me explain. There is nothing to explain. She bent down, picked up the letter, and smoothed its creases with a shaking hand. You took the one thing that made my suffering bearable. I will never forgive you for that. She walked past him, leaving behind the faint scent of lavender and the wreckage of his carefully constructed walls. Aldrich stood alone in the candlelight, staring at the desk where she had wept, and for the first time in his life, he felt the full weight of his own cruelty. He had married her to save her from another man's deceit. He had kept her at a distance because he was terrified of loving someone who could leave him, just as his own mother had abandoned his father for another man, just as his younger sister had eloped with a scoundrel and died in a carriage accident while fleeing her shame. He had buried his heart beneath duty and silence, telling himself it was strength. But all he had done was hurt the one woman he was sworn to protect. And now she hated him. The days that followed were a slow, agonizing unraveling. Alara moved into a separate wing of Thornwood Hall, a suite of rooms overlooking the rose garden that was as far from Aldrich's quarters as the house allowed. She took her meals alone. She continued her work with the tenants, but she no longer invited his opinion or shared her plans. When they passed in the corridors, she inclined her head with the cold courtesy of a stranger. Aldrich watched her slip further and further away, and a desperate, clawing fear took root in his chest. He found himself lingering near the stables in the mornings, hopping to catch a glimpse of her riding out. He positioned himself in the library at the hour she usually fetched a book, just to hear her voice when she greeted the footman. He began to notice the small things he had ignored for so long, the gentle way she spoke to the maid, the quiet intelligence in her questions to the steward, the way her smile transformed her whole face. He had been blind, willfully blind. One afternoon, unable to bear it any longer, he sat at his desk and began to write. Not a letter to be sent, but a confession to be released from his soul. He wrote about his mother's betrayal, his sister's tragic death, the fear that had hardened his heart like ice. He wrote about the first time he had seen Alara, standing in her father's garden, her hair unbound and her laughter bright, and how he had wanted, more than anything, to believe in the kind of love she deserved. He wrote about the nights he had stood outside her door, listening to her cry, too much of a coward to comfort her. He wrote that he was sorry, that he loved her, that he had loved her for so long it felt like a sickness, a madness, a fire he could not extinguish. He signed it with a trembling hand and placed it in a wooden box along with all her stolen letters, every single one, still tied with faded ribbon. He added his own unsent letters, the ones he had written over the past weeks and never dared to deliver. Then he carried the box to her sitting room and left it on her settee, his heart pounding so violently he thought it might break through his ribs. Then he waited. Alara found the box that evening. She had been reading by the fire, or trying to. The words kept blurring because her mind was too full of memories. When she saw the box, her first instinct was to send it away unopened. But curiosity, or perhaps the lingering ghost of hope, made her lift the lid. The first thing she saw were her own letters, dozens of them. She picked one up and unfolded it, her eyes skimming the familiar, desperate words. "I am so lonely, Cedric. I feel as though I am fatting away." But underneath her letters was a stack of papers written in a different hand, a strong, slanted script. She began to read, and as she did, the fire crackled low and the room grew very still. "My dear Alara, I am a coward. I have loved you since the moment I saw you, and I was too afraid to tell you. I feared that if I let myself love you, you would leave, or worse, I would fail you as I failed my sister. I thought if I kept you at a distance, I could protect us both from pain. Instead, I became the source of your suffering. I read your letters to another man and felt a jealousy so dark it terrified me. I told myself it was duty that made me intercept them, but it was not duty. It was desperation. I could not bear for you to love him. I wanted you to love me, even though I gave you nothing in return. There is no excuse for what I did. You are right to hate me, but I need you to know that every cold word I spoke was a lie. Every time I looked away, my heart was screaming for you. I love you, Alara. I love you so much it has ruined me. I would give anything to go back and be the husband you deserved. I would hold you when you cried. I would dance with you at every ball. I would tell you every single day that you are the most precious thing in my world. Please forgive me. Please let me try to make this right. I cannot lose you. I cannot. The letter trembled in her hands. She read it again. Then again. Tears fell onto the paper, smudging the ink, and she did not wipe them away. She had spent so long building walls around her heart, and now, in the space of a few pages, those walls crumbled into dust. He loved her. He had always loved her. The revelation was too vast to contain. She stood, clutching the letter, and ran through the quiet corridors of Thornwood Hall. Her slippers made no sound on the cold stone. She did not know where she was going until she found herself outside his study door, breathless and shaking. She pushed the door open. Aldrich was slumped in his chair by the dying fire, his head in his hands. He looked up when he heard her, and the raw anguish in his eyes stole her breath. He had not expected her to come. "Alara," he whispered, rising to his feet. She held up the letter. "Is this true, everything you wrote?" His face crumpled. He looked like a man standing on the edge of a cliff, knowing the fall would destroy him but unable to turn back. Every word. "I loved you too late. I know that now. But I love you, Alara. I have never stopped. I never will." The sob that escaped her was not a sound of pain. It was release. All the months of loneliness, the years of hopping and breaking, the slow, torturous path to this moment, it all poured out of her in a flood of tears. She crossed the room and stopped just inches from him, close enough to see the unshed tears glistening in his own eyes. "I stopped waiting for love," she said, her voice raw. "I told myself I would never need it again. I built a life around the absence of you, and now you tell me this." Aldrich reached out, his fingers hovering near her cheek, afraid to touch. "I will spend the rest of my life earning your forgiveness. I will wait as long as you need. I will never ask for more than you wish to give. But I had to tell you the truth. I could not let you go without knowing that you were loved. Completely. Desperately." She closed the distance. Her hand caught his and pressed it to her tear-streaked cheek. "I am so tired of being alone," she whispered. "I am so tired of pretending I do not care." Something broke in him then, a dam of restraint that had held back years of longing. He pulled her into his arms with a choked sound, burying his face in her hair. She felt the tremor that ran through his body, the silent heave of a man who had not allowed himself to weep since he was a boy. "Forgive me," he murmured against her temple. "Please forgive me." "I already have," she breathed. "I forgave you the moment I read your words." They stood there for a long time, wrapped in each other, the fire burning low and the night settling softly around Thornwood Hall. It was not a perfect reconciliation. There were still scars, still questions, still a long road of healing ahead. But it was a beginning, fragile and real and full of a hope neither of them had dared to feel in years. In the weeks that followed, Aldrich kept his promise. He did not push. He did not demand. He simply showed up, every morning, every evening, in 1,000 small ways. He brought her tea when she worked late on the account books. He walked with her through the village, listening to her talk about the tenants as if their welfare was the most fascinating subject in the world. He asked her opinion on matters of the estate and actually followed her advice. And slowly, tentatively, Alara began to believe in love again. One golden afternoon in late autumn, they were walking through the orchard at the edge of the estate. The air smelled of ripe apples and wood smoke. Aldrich stopped beneath an old oak tree and turned to face her, his dark eyes soft. "I used to watch you from the library window," he confessed. "You would sit on that bench over there and write in your little notebook. I wanted so badly to join you, but I was too proud, too afraid." Alara looked up at him, her heart swelling. "What changed?" "You stopped waiting." He took her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "And I realized that if I did not fight for you, I would lose the only thing that ever mattered." She smiled, a real full smile that lit up her whole face. "Then I am glad I stopped waiting." Aldrich lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her fingers. It was a gesture of reverence, of gratitude, of a love so deep it could not be contained in words. That winter, Thornwood Hall felt different. The fireplaces burned brighter. The servants moved with a new lightness. And in the great hall, on a snowy evening just before Christmas, Aldrich Vane took his wife's hand and led her onto the dance floor. There was no music except the crackle of the flames and the whisper of the wind outside, but they danced anyway, slowly, tenderly, his arm around her waist and her head resting against his chest. "I used to dream of this," Alara murmured, her eyes closed. "I used to imagine you would look at me the way you are looking at me now." "I have always looked at you this way," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. "I was just too much of a fool to let you see." She lifted her head and met his gaze. "No more hiding." "No more hiding," he agreed. And then, in the hushed, golden quiet of the hall, the Duke of Thornwood kissed his Duchess for the first time, not with passion that consumed, but with a tenderness that healed. It was the beginning of a new story, one written not in stolen letters or cold silences, but in whispered confessions, gentle touches, and the quiet, enduring promise of a love that had almost been lost, but was found just in time. And in the years that followed, whenever the village children asked about the Duke and Duchess of Thornwood, the old steward would smile and say, "They taught each other how to love, and once they learned, they never stopped." If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Also, let us know in the comments which country you're watching from. Your support means a lot to us. Thank you for watching and see you in the next amazing story.